You look at Tampa, you look at like what Ottawa's going to be, you look at what Detroit's going to be, all these other teams, Buffalo, the team that's going to be in the up and up, but we'll see because they got a lot of younger players at key spots there. Barring like Toronto, like are there any other teams that like you can project where exactly they are going to land? I think we can assume that Bruins, Florida are going to be in the mix. Tampa is still going to be in the mix. They're still too talented. But again, how it all kind of maps out, I think it's kind of anyone's guess right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I still have the Bruins at 3. I don't know if I think I had Tampa initially at 2. This doesn't help their case at all to be 2.
The exclusive wagering partner of the CLNS Media Network.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, episode 166. That's Conor Ryan. I'm Evan Marinofsky. Connor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. We're always presented by our good friends over at Fanduel. All the best odds, everything you could need. Makes watching games very fun, I must admit. Makes watching games very, very fun. But lots to talk about in the Bruins world. So actually, before we start, they sent their first group to Providence, which is no surprise. Not really. I mean, there were no surprises in it. Guys that you tweeted it out, guys that are going to go down to Providence and go to Providence Bruins training camp. And this is when we start to see the field dwindle a bit. The practice groups start to go down to 1. We start to get a little bit better of a sense of what the team's going to be. I mean, you didn't really have any surprises in that grouping, did you?
No, like a guy like Luke Tobrowski, I think had a really promising first season down in Providence, but I think Mark Dever kind of said it best. Really promising guy, but not quite ready for a extended shot during training camp. So that's a guy, a few other players like that you're expecting to maybe take a nice step forward down in Providence, but there's no need to rush them. They're not a Lysell who's been there for years. They're not like a guy like Lohrei or Poitras, maybe of a higher ceiling right into it. So yeah, not any shocking surprises. Not like Poitras or Lohrei, any of those guys get sent down quite yet. This is kind of what we expect from the first set of cuts.
It's like America's Got Talent. They go from 80 people to 40, and those 40 be like, I'm not really surprised by any of them, and then just keeps dwindling down. Except they're not going down to 1, thankfully. I want to give a shout out to a listener of ours, Connor. I meant to bring this up before this, but I was getting my skates sharpened at Warrior Ice Arena, which is down the street from me, so it's an easy place to go get the skates sharpened. And one of the people who was working the desk, Colin Burns, said he was a big fan of us and listens to our content, and he enjoys our Bruins talk. And I said, "Oh, I feel so bad for you, Colin. How spending it with us? So that's I don't know. Maybe there might be better uses of your time, but very appreciative of Colin and all the people out there who listen. You guys make it possible."
Colin.
Yes, shout out Colin. Hell of a skate sharpener, by the way. I mean, the skates were sharp. I felt my edges great. I was tearing it up in men's league. So that's all that matters. But yeah, great guy. We were talking for a while. Bruins stuff, opinions, all that fun stuff. Definitely I'll be going back to get my skate sharpened by him. That's for damn sure. But yeah, thank you to everyone. We always say it, but we really do mean it. Thank you to all the very loyal listeners who listened to both Poke the Bear and Bruins Beat. Anyways, Bruins-Sabres was earlier this week, and tough loss for the Bruins. They got the goal at the end by Steen. Lucic did get a punch in, which I was waiting for that to happen, but it was right at the end, just on cue, But one of I think the biggest thing that people took away from it was Mason Lohrei's first real game in the preseason. It was his first game in the preseason, and obviously has not played in the preseason before. Played 29 minutes. Next closest was what? Like Ian Mitchell was it 23?
I believe so. I think that's right.
Yeah.
Something just over 20, I believe.
Lohrei never left the ice. I mean, he was out there for literally half the game, and it felt like he was out there for the entirety of the game. And it looked really good. Looked solid. There were some little minor things, maybe a bad breakout pass here or there, or, the pace seeming a little too fast, but for the most part, looked pretty damn good. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Montgomery kind of said it best, where he got better as the game went on, which is what you're hoping for any young player trying to learn the system and kind of get caught up to the NHL game. Montgomery did note, I also want to extend condolences to Jim Montgomery and his family for
Yes, absolutely.
the passing of his mother, Dorothy. So he'll be back on Sunday, I believe. But when you last spoke to the media, you mentioned that. I think like the time was a little bit off. I think they think he was more 25, 26, which is still pretty significant for a young guy like that, getting thrown into the fire. And it kind of goes off of what we still said with Matthew Poitras, where, again, are these guys ready to make that jump up? Probably not. Like, it's still probably slim odds that they're going to crack the NHL roster out of camp, but at least the Bruins are kind of giving them the full experience, right? They're throwing them into the fire and seeing if they can hold their own. Like, it's not like it's like Poitras starting on the fourth line with other guys that are probably destined for Providence, or it's not like Lohrei's the third D pair with another maybe AHL level guy. These are guys that they identify as being high ceiling guys that they hope can continue to develop and be part of this kind of post Bergeron core, this new identity they're trying to build out there. So good on them for kind of giving these guys an extended look here. And again, it'd be one thing. I don't think any of us are setting super high expectations for Lohrei this year in terms of like, were you expecting him to average 27 minutes, have 3 assists in his first game? Like, again, you can notice some of the things where, decision making with that, limited time and space that's afforded to guys, especially defensemen, the NHL level, the skating, a few of those things. Nothing out of the ordinary in terms of what some of these younger defensemen usually have to develop as they kind of advance through the system there. But yeah, I think it was encouraging just to see the Bruins give him an extended look like that. Like, was that a game that's going to necessarily put him in the positioning where all of a sudden he's fighting for the third D pairing spot next to like Forbort or what have you? Like, probably not, but he more than held his own under pretty heavy minutes out there. So I think that's at the very least very encouraging for a guy that, again, is he ready right now? Probably not, but I don't know. Check back in November, December, see how he's doing down in Providence, because they clearly think highly of him. They're going to give him that many minutes out of the gate.
And the Sabres had a lot of their big league guys in there. Tage Thompson and Jeff Skinner, who Mason Lohrei dangled. The Jeff Skinner thing, my goodness. But that's the thing, and I think you nailed it there, is like, doesn't have to be now, but I think the better he is in the preseason, if he continues to kind of go on this ascent, he probably won't make the roster out of camp, but he might continue that ascent into Providence so that in November or December, they say, you know what, let's get him up here now. Let's see what he's got right now. And I think, for a guy like Lohrei, that's a really good thing. And it's good to see him adjusting well to the pace, which I think was sort of a big thing going from college to the pros. Can he, at 6'4", he's a good skater, but he's a bigger guy. Like, it's tough to adjust to that. And again, I think he solid, had an assist. I thought he was good on the power play. Like, I think that was all there. So again, I understand fans saying, hey, you should make the roster out of camp. The thing with Lohrei is, like, they don't need him to make the roster out of camp. So I don't see the rush. You have 6 NHL defensemen. We'll get to the 7th defenseman spot later, but why would you want him up as the 7th D being scratched or like playing, not many minutes a night, when you could be in Providence being the number 1 or 2 guy playing, 25, 30 minutes a night. I don't know if you're doing 30 down there every night, but somewhere in the 22 to 27 minute range every night in Providence in the pro game, I think is a much better option for him. So the more reps, the better. Johnny Beecher continued to look pretty good. Almost had a goal in front of the net. Again, I know the chance finishing has been a real issue of his, but again, he's fast. He seems to be in the right place in a lot of these plays. What have you thought of Beecher so far?
Yeah, I think, again, it's kind of similar to his first game. Obviously, he scores that goal against the Rangers on Sunday, but you still saw some of the same things in terms of the details, what he needs to do to carve out a spot on that fourth line, playing with pace, making things happen with that speed, winning pucks along the board, separating players from the puck. Again, I think that's what he needs to do to solidify his spot on that fourth line. And again, we'll see how maybe a guy like Patrick Brown fights for a spot there as this tramp kind of progresses, because I still think he's probably the other most likely candidate for that fourth line center spot. Like, Boquist is a guy that maybe is in the mix, but he's not very good at center, so I think you're kind of sticking him more on the wing. So right now, like, Beecher probably has the inside edge. It's just he has to keep on building it, because again, when you look at the Bruins and what they're looking for. And a guy like Patrick Brown, who's, again, maybe limited offensively, but very good on faceoffs, really physical player, a veteran. He probably has the inside edge. Like, it can't just be on Beecher, keep on moving his feet and just hoping that, the skill sticks out. He needs to kind of play that physical fourth line role to a T to get this spot. And so far he's done it. He's keeping it simple, playing to his strengths, and he's letting things happen out there on the ice as opposed to trying to do too much for what the role entails as a fourth line center. Snap into action this NFL season with Fanduel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything, from spreads to player props and more. And frankly, that's the best part about FanDuel, is that you can bet on anything. You want to bet on how many touchdowns Mac Jones is going to throw this year? Be my guest. Maybe how many wins the Bruins are going to have in 2023-24. Go for it. You can really do it all. So bet now on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Plus, when you win, you can get paid instantly. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and kick off the NFL season with an offer you don't want to miss. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
You mentioned Boquist. It's interesting because I actually thought he had a pretty good game against the Sabres, and he was on the left wing. He's probably going to be on the wing, if he makes up with the Bruins. Is that sort of an instance? And like as you were talking about it, I was thinking about it. We all love that Lucic is back. He's great. Awesome with the media, this and that. But like, is that an instance where a Lucic or someone like that kind of gets in the way of Boquist potentially playing more minutes? Because Boquist, they have vastly different games, but Boquist seems a little more with the current NHL, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the same way you view like Patrick Brown and Beecher, that probably Brown or in this case Lucic has the inside edge, but I don't think it's set in stone as much as, again, Lucic is a fan favorite. You ideally have him penciled in there, but if his game has declined or he's not being effective in what his fourth line role is now, and I think he's accepted like a checking line role. I don't think it's like he all of a sudden expecting him to be a top 6 guy. I don't think anyone's expecting that, even him. His game tails off where he's not effective or he's letting other teams really cave in at fourth line, especially on offense. Then change is going to be there. Again, it all comes down to the internal depth that the Bruins clearly have prioritized this offseason with the amount of guys they signed. So again, Lucic probably has the inside edge, but Boquist seems like they're going to give him a look kind of wherever. Maybe he's on the fourth line at right wing. Maybe he's further up in the lineup on the third line. I think he has more to give offensively. So we'll see, but I agree. He was really moving his feet, making things happen in the game against Buffalo, which really wasn't the case for too many other forwards as that game kind of went on.
No, it wasn't. And you wrote about this for Boston.com. A lot of passengers up front. And I think, we talked going into this training camp of all the guys in the bottom 6 that are fighting for spots. And they brought in, you even look at Danton Heinen and Alex Chason on PTOs, both of them in the lineup against Buffalo. Neither really did a heck of a lot. And again, it's one game. They will have more preseason games. But for guys like that who are really, the margin is razor thin, you can't have some of those no-shows like they did against Buffalo.
Yeah, I think you kind of said it with these guys who are PTO contracts. They just really don't have a lot of leeway, a lot of breathing room to really kind of carve out a spot when they really have to showcase their talents. And again, pretty quiet game for both of them. Again, Montgomery has kind of said that, it doesn't all just hinge on one preseason game. You look at practices, how they play there. And I think especially Chiason's been pretty impactful in practices, being really physical, making things happen on most of his shifts. But yeah, again, you can be a good practice player. You can do all those things. Maybe have a game where you score a goal in the preseason. But when you're a PTO guy and you have to leapfrog other guys in the lineup just to get a contract, you really have to kind of put your best foot forward. And right now, you look at just the amount of guys they have out there. Both him, Chiasson, and Heinen really need to kind of take that another step forward. They want to realistically be considered for that third or fourth line role. Because you look at it, whether it's a guy like Lauko, Boquist, all these different players, they need to show a little bit more. Along with the guy like I think Merkulov was a guy who had a pretty high stock going into it. Again, he had a few stronger shifts later on. Even Heinen did, as I think the pressure ramped up. You're trying to get back into the game. But for a guy like Merkulov, who's advertised as a really talented offensive guy, I think probably far too many lulls in that game, especially early on.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I was not super impressed with Merkulov's game against the Sabres. Looking for a little more. Again, we'll sort of see it hopefully more on Friday night when their next preseason game is. But yeah, I agree. I mean, we've said it before. You could make 4 lines out of the guys that are fighting for those bottom 6 spots. And it's razor thin for those guys. And you could make the argument that a guy like Danton Heinen's game is not one to jump off to the eye. It's not one that's going to stand out a ton. Maybe you don't need that. But in a camp where there's so much competition, you do need to stand out. And, reputation is one thing, but what you're doing in the current moment is another. So I think I'm going to print a t-shirt with that statement. That was right off the cuff. That's deep.
Good job.
That's going to get people people are just crashing their cars because they're just so in their feels right now. Hopefully you're not crashing.
Please don't.
Yeah. Well, I want to hit this next. The roster battles. What roster battles do you see as still up in the air? Because some things are solidifying. It feels like, you got Lucic probably on the left side to start on that 4th line, and Frederick and Geeky on the 3rd line. And what are you seeing as roster battles right now?
Yeah, I think kind of one of those vacant spots at wing on the 3rd line is still really up for grabs. I think right now, again, a lot can change over the next week and a half, but probably you're looking at Geeky at 3C, Frederick probably next to him. That seems like again, if you're looking at how Montgomery has kind of paired things out, where it's a lot of pairings like Pasta and Zaka, Marchand and Coyle, like I think Geeky and Frederick's a group they want to keep together there in that 3rd line. Who's the other guy that complements them? Remains to be seen, right? Again, you can look at a guy like Boquist, you can look at a guy like Heinen. It kind of depends on whether they want maybe a guy that offers a little bit more offense to try to, because again, I don't know if Frederick and Geeky are necessarily guys that drive lines. They hope that Frederick has more to give. They hope that Geeky can produce more with more minutes, but it's still kind of not set in stone there. So whether it's maybe a guy like Heinen who adds more defensive capabilities, they think Boquist can offer more. Again, maybe Merkulov rebounds and can put together a better performance, and they want to try him in that spot. I really think it's still completely up for grabs as to who kind of slots in there on that other spot on the 3rd line.
Yeah, I agree. I just, it's a tough call because there are a lot, and no one has stood out enough, I think, to really warrant those minutes. And again, it's been 2 preseason games, but I still think you'd hope to maybe have a little more clarity on that at this point. Maybe we will get some more after Friday, but yeah, that's one roster battle. I'll say 7th defenseman. I think 7th defenseman is fascinating. You look at, as I said, they have 6 NHL defensemen. You've got Grzelcyk, McAvoy, Lindholm, Carlo, and you have Forbort and Shattenkirk. After that, a whole lot of question marks in terms of that 7th defenseman. But I will say Ian Mitchell has looked pretty good through 2 training camp games. Moves the puck well, solid enough in his own zone. Like, I think there's a legitimate case he has to pass Jakub Zboril to be that 7th defenseman. Seems like he could be a little more reliable than Zboril. So that, like, Mitchell versus Zboril feels like sort of the battle there. As I said earlier, I don't see Lohrei as a candidate for the 7th defenseman spot. I think that's sort of wasting his A, potential, and B, just him. You can say, oh yeah, Mason, play into the 6, but you can't really do that when you're not playing much or healthy scratch, just a 7th defenseman. So to me, it comes down to Zboril and Mitchell. Is there any, I haven't been super impressed with Regula quite yet on D. And I can't think of anybody else that I think would really, maybe like a Mike Callahan potentially. What do you think?
Yeah, Callahan, I think, has had a pretty good. He was, I think, really good in that game on Friday. I think Riley on Sunday rather. I think Riley Walsh had a pretty good game too as well. Those guys that I think could be in the mix. Yeah, Callahan kind of, I think, is one of those guys that probably goes down to Providence and is really kind of your go-to shutdown guy and is building a case to be one of the next men up. But that's kind of how I view it. But yeah, I think Ian Mitchell's a really interesting guy. Again, never really found traction with the Blackhawks, but obviously a former player for Montgomery, University of Denver. As you said, really impactful in the games. I think against Buffalo, he had 9 shot attempts. It was all over the ice in a good way. There's times where it can be all over the ice and it
He's replacing
blows
Connor
up.
Clifton.
Yes, exactly. So maybe not as doesn't have as much heft, maybe not as hard hitting as a guy like Clifton, but a guy that seems to play into what Montgomery wants, especially on the blue line of knowing when to jump up into the play, be active, push pace, doing all those things that kind of fit in with their game plan. So I don't know if he's all of a sudden fighting for the third pairing spot with Shattenkirk. But again, if you look at just that 7th defenseman, guy that can slot into the lineup, he kind of reminds you a little bit of like the Steven Kampfer, like puck moving guy that can fill in when needed and do his job in that role.
Reliable, which I think what they really want out of that 7th defenseman spot. You brought up an interesting point to me before the show to talk about, and I it's one thing, we've talked a lot about the bottom 6 in the last, today, earlier this week, last week, the week before. We talked about the bottom 6 a lot, but we haven't really talked about the top 6 much ever since Montgomery did that interview with Steve Conroy, the Herald, where he basically mapped out, all right, we're going with Marchand, Coyle, DeBrusk, James Van Riemsdyk, Zacha, and Pasternak. But is it worth it to potentially say, you know what, let's have a super line with Marchand, Zacha, Pasternak, and, DeBrusk, Coyle, and Van Riemsdyk, Coyle, DeBrusk? Is it worth it to start with that?
I tend to err, I think, more on the side of caution, where I think you fall into the same thing that kind of plagued your teams in years past of just being too top heavy. I think right now you look at Zacha with Pasternak by themselves, they're already in a pretty good spot. I think they're going to drive play anyway together. I think you look at where you were just a few years ago, where if other teams could shut down your overloaded top line, they're doing pretty well. And now when you don't have guys like Bergeron or Krejci or someone else there that can drive play with lesser guys, you're making the job that much easier. So I think you saw last year the benefits of putting, a proven playmaker like Marchand on a separate line with arguably the best goal scorer in the game and David Pasternak. It just makes it that much tougher for other teams to match up against you. And again, I think if the concession is, oh man, you have to put only, James Van Riemsdyk with Zacha and Pasternak, I think they're going to be just fine. Again, I think more for JVR, it's going to be play style, how he fits with those guys. But in terms of, I think, Zacha and Pasternak together, I think they're going to be just fine. Not to say that Zacha is going to break loose for 70 points, but I think when you just you saw last year, even when Zacha would slot in for Krejci when he was hurt, anyone who I think skates David Pasternak is going to do pretty well next year. And I don't think you need to overload it with Marchand.
I agree. I also think balance is good. That's A, because you're going to Marchand with Coyle, which will help his production. And also, if you're down a goal with 10 minutes left in the game, you can switch up your lines. They're not set in stone for a whole game. So I would rather them go with the balanced approach that they're going with. I know you and I were both kind of on the team, try things out in the top 6, throw Frederick in there, see what happens. But now that they're not doing that, keep it balanced. Don't overdo it with a top line. And you can use that trio late in games when you're down a goal or you need, more than 2. They might not be down a goal a lot to the Tampa Bay Lightning, though. Might not be down a goal a lot to them. Big news out of Tampa on Thursday. Andrei Vasilevsky had a micro discectomy. Oh, I can't read.
Microprocesses.
Microprocesses on a lumbar back herniation this morning. He's expected to miss the first 2 months of the regular season. That's pretty sizable. Now, you could argue, first of all, I don't know how 2 months for that kind of thing and on your back. I don't know if that's just going to be like, I'm back 8 to 10 weeks later. I'm good to go. It's a back thing. I think the pro, not the pro, but like, I guess the what's the word? The good in all of this bad for Tampa is it's more rest for Vasilevsky. But again, like, is that back going to be normal when he's back? I don't know. But I don't think it's good either way. Not a hot take. I don't think it's good.
Yeah, no. And again, it comes down to when you look at these other teams that are fighting for the spots in the Atlantic, people obviously focusing on the Bruins of taking a step back, which was inevitable. You're not going to be the same team you were last year. I think we both agree they're still going to be a playoff team, but Tampa's one of those teams too that you wonder how much they have. You look at their top end talent, it's evident they can still have enough high end skill to kind of outscore teams, what have you. But when you look at just the amount of depth they've lost, even guys like, Ross Colton, Alex Killorn, all these other kind of key pieces they had, you lose them. Now with Vasilevsky being kind of the main game breaker. Again, we've said before, Vasilevsky, when he's on his game, can win you series by himself. It doesn't even matter if Kucherov or Stamkos or any of these guys are hurt as well. You have that factoring into it. But yeah, as you said, it's the most important position out there. You have him missing for 2 months. And again, I don't know how many back surgeries, especially where it's only a 2-month recovery time of how it is. It's one of those ones you see that, and it's like kind of the same with like an Achilles injury. You see it and you're like, that's not great. You don't want a back injury or anything like back, hip.
Aaron Rodgers saying he'll be back for the playoffs, yes,
exactly.
In your dreams. I don't know about that.
I don't know. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of goes into, you look at the Bruins and where they are. And a lot is said about them plummeting down the standings, but Tampa's another team you have to be cognizant of. And again, it's as much as I think we can paint out that Toronto's going to be probably up near the top, Florida, barring some severe regression, should be in the mix as well as being teams that are going to be near the top of the Atlantic. You look at Tampa, you look at like what Ottawa is going to be, you look at what Detroit's going to be, all these other teams, Buffalo, the team that's going to be in the up and up, but we'll see because they got a lot of younger players at key spots there. Barring like Toronto, like are there any other teams that like you can project where exactly they are going to land? I think we can assume that Bruins, Florida are going to be in the mix. Tampa is still going to be in the mix. They're still too talented. But again, how it all kind of maps out, I think it's kind of anyone's guess right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I still have the Bruins at 3. I don't know if I think I had Tampa initially at 2. This doesn't help their case at all to be 2. Again, like, does a team like Buffalo catapult into the top 3? Do the Florida Panthers get into the top 3? I know that, they have their own injuries and different things like that. And they lost pieces over the offseason. Thankfully, the Bruins won't have to deal with Radko Gudas trying to take their head off every play. But again, it's sort of like Hockey East. Hockey East has, a solidified top team, Boston University, and the bottom teams are pretty evident. But in between, it's a lot of who the hell knows. And it feels like, the Atlantic is a similar thing. But again, I saw you quote tweet something. I think it might have been ESPN who tweeted out their rankings. It might have been ESPN. They both had the Bruins in like second and third. People were like, what? How are they in second and third? And you're like, no, it's like, I don't know why people are think it's going to be such a steep drop off. So again, I don't know what's going to happen, but I still, my Bruins at 3 in the Atlantic is not changing. Do you have them at 2 or 3, or have you even made up your mind on that yet?
I have not made up my mind yet. Check back at me when we do our bold predictions, but I think I'm leaning more towards them being in that spot as opposed to wild card last week of the season, fretting over where they're going to land in the standings or anything like that. So that's at least early on the initial impression.
Hoping that remember that happened with Ottawa in 2016. Rask had had a stomach bug or something. You guys got to eat like clean if it's the last week of the season. No eating out, nothing, none of that. If that's the case, but yeah, not great news out of Tampa for the Lightning. But anyways, Connor, what can people look forward to from you over at Boston.com and the Boston Globe?
Yeah, we're going to have you covered throughout these next few weeks of training camp and preseason. We're obviously, this is dropping on Friday. We'll have takeaways, insight from Friday's game against the Flyers, where we'll actually see Brad Marchand, David Pastrnak, Poitras will get another game. You got a lot of the defense playing, Lindholm, McAvoy, Shattenkirk. So good to see a few guys we haven't seen quite yet out there on the ice. I assume that Brad Marchand, David Pastrnak will be pretty good. I don't think that's a bold take. But throughout these next few weeks, we'll have you covered throughout with lineup battles, roster battles, all that good stuff. So please read all of our stuff over at Boston.com. If you want to follow me on Twitter, you can at Conor Ryan _93.
Go do all that. We're presented by Fanduel. This has been Poke the Bear. You Poke the Bear listeners, have a great rest of your week.